The Need for Speed franchise was at its all-time peak in 2005, with Most Wanted being the most sold and later the most loved game still to this day. So it was all natural for us fans to believe that the next entry was going to be a direct sequel to the masterpiece itself. Which it was, but not in the way we were expecting. So what made Carbon good, but yet so unrememberable when looking back? That is what we're going to find out today. Carbon was first and foremost a Most Wanted sequel, but a lot of people are not seeming to call it that, but would rather ask, where is Most Wanted 2? And one of the reasons for that is the short and unfinished campaign that they presented to us. The game starts off after the events of Most Wanted, in the hero car, the BMW M3 GTR, where we encounter Cross, the villain from the previous game, which was excellent and really set the foundation of the game. But quickly after that I really started to notice something was off, like they missed something. The problem was that the characters did not remind me of those from the previous games in terms of importance. A lot of the cutscenes, although good, suffered because of them lacking presence. We meet a lot of characters in this game, with most of them being once or twice. This irregularity confused me a bit when playing this game, and with them acting like you, the hero, know exactly who they are is even more confusing.
I can help you guys out. I'm one of the best drivers in this city and you know it. Boy, if you don't...
And the most overlooked thing in the story has got to be the three bosses, Kenji, Wolf and Angie. These three has got to be the most irrelevant characters in this game. Sal and Neville had better lines than these three, which is astonishing when comparing to the other characters in Most Wanted, like Ronnie for an example. Why this was an issue is because of the game taking itself way too serious. Need for Speed Most Wanted had corny and ridiculous characters such as Ronnie to break away from that. Although the villains, Darius and Cross, are the ones that fill that gap and makes the experience way better. Their scenes are good and really bring the excitement to the table, but that's it. The problem with the whole thing is also the way they structured the story to begin with. The side characters and even some bigger ones only exist so the game can explain its plot, not to create character development. This is why the ending doesn't feel like an ending at all, with Darius disappearing to the distance. Need for Speed Carbon's story is not what made the game memorable, but it was rather its gameplay, especially the canyon races. Racing in Palmont City has got to be one of the best in the franchise, with tight and narrow roads in city and canyon areas. It is truly a good experience. Although the racing has been significantly slowed down from the previous game because of the map layout, but it still feels fast, which is the most important part. What also helps is starting off with faster cars like RX-8, Camaro and Alfa Romeo Brera, which is in my opinion one of the best starter car selection in the franchise. Not only because they're faster, but because they are far more exciting than Fiat Punto and Ford Focus. The variety of races is also perfect, since you're going from territory to territory, so it never really feels like you get to touch the same race more than twice, which cannot be said with some previous entries. But there's one thing that really slows everything down significantly: the crew system. The only thing that was not balanced somewhat at all was the crew members, which almost totally killed the excitement when racing. They would have been good if needed, but at the same time, going through races by yourself would make no sense since you need to take over other crews. But even though you had a crew, I felt like they never really made a difference from having no crew members. The journey would have still carried on the same way without them, which also makes most of these characters unnecessary almost. I feel like they never really had time to work on the system properly, which is a shame, because the idea is great and innovative. I'm pretty sure the idea of taking over territory sounds very appealing for a Need for Speed game even today. A fix to this would have been to maybe include them in police chases, having other crew members attack you and also blocking their attacks in races, and maybe not to use a NOS system for them, but having an amount of times that you could use them instead, to create more of an excitement and importance to them. But what about canyons, the major selling point of this game? How come there's so little to remember from that? Well, to start off, how can something be the selling point if you show it to us 4 times? 4 races is all we got from the canyon, and I know there were more races up there, but they didn't really feel the same because of a few circumstances. No weak guardrail, the AI not as difficult, and in general not as intense as the boss races, which they shouldn't be, but what I mean is that the races should not be the only main selling point of this game. Of course, it was cool at first, watching all the canyon races in the trailers, but they did their marketing so wrong. If its presence was more frequent, it would have been presented in a much better way. That could have been done by beating smaller crew members in canyon duels before you get to challenge the main boss. This was done in Most Wanted with Ronnie and Bull as an example. The city of Palmont is good in terms of layout and looks, and I've definitely experienced great moments on this game because of it. But why is it all blurry when we try to pinpoint different locations in the game? Well, the map did not really get to use its free roam as much as previous games. Underground 2 did by not having quick start events, which later saw Most Wanted implementing this very function into the game. What they understood was going from one place to another across the map is annoying and boring as f***, which is why they had cops. And that is what made every inch of Rockport so memorable for fans. But why would they not prioritize such a thing in Carbon? Making sure that you have a certain bounty to raise the bosses and proceed the story wouldn't be a deal breaker at all, and would work hand in hand with the crew system since they offer bonuses for escaping them. So why get rid of it? I think it all comes down to not wanting to repeat stuff, but to be honest, that's too innovative and unprogressive if you ask me. The game would have definitely gotten a boost in terms of fun and difficulty, because the game only took me 11 hours to beat. Yep, you heard it right. 11 hours is not that bad considering the amount of fun that you have during those 11 hours, which is a thumbs up from me. And if you want 100% completion, it's going to be around 7 or more hours, depending on how good you are at the game. But comparing it to other games, it's very short, especially when you start to look at other racing game franchises. What also made this game way too easy are the drift events. The same mistake was made in previous games, so it really surprises me how they just didn't fix it. It's such a shame that the physics for the drift events were some of the most fun too. It struggled with the same issue as the canyon races, and that is not having enough of them, which is also disappointing. To be honest, there needed to be a lot more events for this game, especially using the highway. Yep, this game had highways, and they were kinda put there only to connect the map with one another. You might think that Carbon mostly had downgraded from Most Wanted and the Underground series, but let me tell you where they excelled in. The music and sounds in this game are amazing, even for today's standards, and is the only thing I really wouldn't touch at all, except for the tire screeching, which is bearable to a certain degree. Everything from the ambient sounds to car sounds, but the soundtrack is on a whole different level. Now, some of you might not agree with me, and that I do understand, but for what the game was, the soundtrack really did them justice. Why? Because the soundtrack is one of the most memorable things from this game. The vibe that it gave was perfect, and really made the experience more intense and exciting, especially when racing in the canyon. The innovations did not stop there, with the customization also getting an overhaul. Everything from how you upgraded the performance parts to visual customization changed for the better. With the performance parts you could change what you wanted those to do, like braking more with the front or back wheels, or focusing more on top speed or acceleration when upgrading the transmission and more, which worked amazingly because this is not a Forza Motorsport or Gran Turismo type of game. On the customization we saw a lot more varied parts here and there, which was great, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about Autosculpt, which meant freely customizing and making your own custom parts for the car if you're unfamiliar with it. This is in my opinion a heck of an innovation if you think about it. The amount of personal detail you could do now becomes endless. But the problem is, it was unfinished. Again, as the other parts of this game. I feel like there needed to be better looking parts for this to work even better, because they just weren't. And you also could customize your crew member's car, which is quite cool. The only problem is it being hidden behind the rotate the car button, which I really don't like. Overall, I must say I really like what they did. Graphics is something I personally do not have as a #1 priority, and it's why I decided to speak about it later in the video. And to be honest, there's almost no need to speak about it. This game has aged very well, and graphics is one of the major reasons why. It honestly looks really good for today's standards, considering this game came out in 2006. That was almost 16 years ago. And what also makes graphics great is the atmosphere that it offers. They took a lot of inspiration from the Japanese roads and Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, and it shows in the narrow roads and canyons. But since the game is made in the US, they had to model it differently. To make a map based in two countries with two different infrastructures is hard and probably very challenging, and somehow they nailed it, which is very impressive. The only negative thing I will say is the port for the PC, which is the gameplay footage that you're seeing. It's definitely bad but not horrible. Let's just say that some things that are not supposed to be seen are seen, and also some areas flicker when racing past them, which does not bother me too much. Something that does bother me though is how we cannot experience the multiplayer properly anymore, since they closed the servers the 31st of August last year. Of course, this game was released years before the explosion of the internet, so very few fortunate people had access to the multiplayer. From what I heard, it's quite good for the time that it came out, and has a lot of modes that I would like to see added in the next Need For Speed game, such as lap knockout events and more. There probably is a way to play this game online with others, but it's nothing I found myself, but if you have, put it in the comments. To be honest, the multiplayer is not that big of a deal for me when it came to this game, since it never really was a super big priority for me back then. Something I think is a big deal for these older games is modding, and how good and compatible the game is for it. And this game is clearly one of the best when it comes to just that. Mods like Battle Royale and Redux really spice up the game and really squeeze out the stuff that the developers left in the background, such as unfinished races and cars and so on. And even offering new cars to the game like the R32 that you're seeing. The Battle Royale is quite an experience, though I would recommend leaving this for last since it really can be challenging at times. Especially if you haven't played this game for a while or even played this game at all. They even fix some things such as the drift events and make them a whole lot more exciting by putting them on the streets of Palmont City and San Juan, which is where you play the tutorial and is also included in this mod. Props to these talented modders, to be fair, because they have done a fantastic job with making this game worth coming back to, and that is appreciated. Carbon has its issues and we can clearly see why it is. Let me tell you what I mean. If we take a look at everything that is missing or done poorly, it clearly shows a pattern that we have seen before from games that are under EA. And that is the amount of time spent on actually making the game. Need for Speed Carbon is clearly too ambitious to be the game that it's supposed to be, made in a year only. And this game is where the bad game cycle all started. They still managed to pull out good numbers at the end of the day, selling a decent 3.2 million copies compared to Most Wanted's 3.8 in the US, which was EA's aim. The problem that I can't grasp is how they totally did not look into the long term of this franchise and what it was going to be. If EA really with all honesty wanted to keep the franchise alive for longer, the smart move is letting Black Box, which were the developers for this and other successful Need for Speeds, continue development for another year so that they can perfect and polish their ideas that they left half done. In this case, the game would have made more sense in terms of story and sold a lot more probably. The problem that I see with most games being made nowadays is how frequent they want their developers to make new sequels fast and with little effort as possible, because that is safe and makes them easy money. At that point in 2006, we was entering an era where the demands for video games were higher than before, and that requires more development time to really make sure that it is a solid AAA game. But then EA decided to close Black Box down just a couple of years later. Simply put, EA didn't see the same type of results and didn't need them anymore, which has been done multiple times over by them. Need for Speed Carbon is great on its own, but what really makes it frustrating is the amount of potential that it has. It really does exceed Most Wanted in terms of innovation and ideas, but lacks in the execution. This does remind me of another game by the name of Need For Speed Heat, which also suffered from some of the same things that Carbon did, which shows us that nothing within the publishers changed since Carbon came out. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the sole reason to us why I'm not excited for Need For Speed 2022. But that's for another video. So watch this video where I speak about the next Need For Speed game and how I predicted it. Thank you guys for watching this video all the way through. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.